Good morning. It's Wednesday, September 25th, 2024. Thanks for joining us today. I'm honored to have Oren Elbaz, the Silver Hermit, here with me. We do these interviews every 2 weeks, so please be on the lookout for them. Oren, welcome back.
Hello, how do you do?
Doing great.
It, Thank you for having me again, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. It's an honor to have you here. Folks, there is some interesting and possibly a little concerning news coming out of Israel right now. I'm just going to read a little from an article from the Jerusalem Post. Prime Minister Netanyahu has asked officials to begin discussing measures to limit circulation of black market currency to curb illegal activity. It also goes on to say part of the proposal suggests limiting private ownership of large amounts of cash alternatives such as gold and silver coins. Netanyahu has also asked the group to consider phasing out the 200 shekel banknote, the largest denomination bill in circulation. And my understanding is that's about $55. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. It's quite ridiculous because if you think about it, it's not a lot of money. Our largest bill, 200 shekels, is only worth $55, and if they cancel it, then we're only left with the 100 shekel bill, which is only worth about $25. So that's really not a lot of money. And now the thought behind it, well, first of all, the incentive behind this reform is because Israel is, of course, fighting a war against Hamas in Gaza, against Hezbollah in Lebanon. And this war costs a lot. There's a huge deficit throughout the past year. There's been a huge government deficit, and the government is looking for money, for more money, to extract more money from the public. Well, first of all, it's a very sad that they don't try to cut their expenses first, but their thought is, oh, there's a lot of undeclared capital. There's a lot of people who are tax evasion, tax avoidance. So let's try to get them. And the thought that they had is that by canceling the 200 shekel note, then they're going to force everyone who's holding large amounts of cash to turn it into the bank, and then if they come with a large amount of cash, they'll have to explain where they got it from. And if it's undeclared, if they didn't pay taxes over it, then they'll have to pay huge amounts of taxes over it. And this way they're hoping to raise cash. But you know my view of the thing. I think that Israelis are overtaxed as it is. I think the very high taxes that we have here in Israel are strangling the economy. I think if they were to ease the tax burden, then economic activity would rise, and perhaps they would expand the tax base, and they would see greater revenues from reducing taxes rather than from higher taxes. So that's one issue. But there was in that article, and everything we know about this plan comes from, I think, a single press release that came out, which is kind of cryptic because it doesn't explain all the details in this program. And there was just one line there talking about the idea of banning what they call cash alternatives, which is, gold, silver coins. They also mentioned metals, etc. So, first of all, I don't consider gold and silver to be cash alternatives. I can consider cash to be an alternative to gold and silver. But,
Nicely put. Yes.
yeah, but the economists in the Bank of Israel or in the Israeli Treasury, they're not aware that gold and silver are money. They think of the shekel as money, although it's just a fiat currency. And I guess they're thinking that if tax evaders don't keep cash because because they ban the cash, so they're going to hold gold and silver coins instead, and they think they can just ban them. And that's kind of silly because history shows that you can't really ban gold and silver. We've had this, in the United States. Roosevelt, he banned gold in 1933, but in hindsight, we know that most people didn't turn in their gold and they kept it. And perhaps it went into hiding, and perhaps they kept it in a sock drawer, or I don't know, in somewhere
Right.
beneath, inside a wall, a hole in the wall, or beneath the floor. But they kept it, and we know that those who kept their gold, because there was a huge devaluation. The entire point of confiscating gold and silver is so that you can devalue the currency, and the people will be locked into your currency and unable to escape that inflation, that devaluation. And history shows that people are not stupid, and even if they're told to just turn in all their gold and silver, they don't really do that.
Yeah, they go
Perhaps
bury
very,
it.
yeah, very few people actually do that, and eventually those who kept their gold and silver are protected from inflation, even if it takes them a few years before they can actually use it.
Seeing this from across the ocean, it is a little concerning. We have, of course, precedents for gold confiscation because they did it before, and we have the comfort of, well, if we have pre-1933 gold coins, there's precedents that those won't be confiscated, so people can take some comfort in sitting on those. There is no precedence for silver confiscation. We do have in our Constitution, Article 1, Section 10, I believe, gold and silver are supposed to be the only money that can be used for payment in debts. So we do have a pretty strong arguing point if, we were facing a similar situation as you guys, out here. But it does really make me wonder, what's going on. It's also concerning just because your country is so small. And the government is very thorough, is what it appears to me as, someone from overseas, that if they go for it, they could really be pretty forceful about it, and who knows, maybe pretty effective. There's not a lot of population for them to have to go through as
Look,
far as if they start looking through transaction records, or if they're trying to figure out who might have what. So
they can
something.
go they can go through transactions records. That's for sure. But in order to confiscate gold and silver, you need to go from house to house and look for it. And that's a difficult thing to do. And to the best of my knowledge, it didn't happen in the United States. There was an executive order to turn in gold bullion, and people were just asked to do that. But
Correct.
nobody went house to house to look to see if people actually did that. So they're counting on public compliance. They're assuming that people will do as they're told, but we're living in a different age now. We're living in an age in which people have very little confidence and trust in their governments. And I think that if they try to ban gold and silver, nobody's going to turn in their gold and silver. They're just going to hide it. I think that we're going to have a black market in gold and silver, and it's not going to be enforceable.
Yeah, it would be extremely difficult for them to do that. And what they would be hoping probably is that if people went to exchange it or buy and sell it, that maybe they could catch them at the time, and of course they would make it illegal to conduct transactions with it. But it would be very difficult. And then of course there would be cost involved and risk involved. Um, if you could imagine out here, if the word got out that there was people going house to house taking everyone's gold and silver, well, the criminals would be looking to target whatever agents were doing that, when they were filling up their van full of precious metals. And they wouldn't feel too bad about taking it from them. Once you look at, you're paying these people that you're going to have to pay for the gas, you're going to have to pay to ship it. There's a lot of cost involved, and especially with going around physically confiscating silver, I think the price point would have to move a lot before that could make any sense, at least out here.
Yes. So, in a counterintuitive way, I can imagine a situation in which even suggesting the idea of gold and silver confiscation can make their price jump even faster because it's just going to draw more attention to the
I
fact
mean,
that gold.
it definitely could, yeah, because the articles would get out. Another thing that we have here is we have this big, huge southern border that people can slip through, and so a lot of folks who have connections south of the border, I mean, there would be nothing stopping them from throwing all their precious metals in their vehicle and just driving to Mexico.
Yeah. And
It
I
would
want
be
to add another thing, which is, it's incredibly stupid of a government to try to prevent people from having gold and silver because in the case of a currency collapse, the fact that people have a few ounces of gold and silver with them, that's probably the only thing that can save them from starving to death. So
right.
if you care about your people, if you care about your country and you want your economy to be able to recover from a situation of hyperinflation, and mind you, we already had one hyperinflation here in Israel. Not many people are aware of that, but during the 80s, there was very, very high inflation. Um, a few years after the inflation in the US was over, it like got here, fashionably late. Around the years 1982, 1983, that was the beginning of the 1980s. We've had very high inflation and the currency almost collapsed. They had to change it from the old shekels to the new shekels. Now they call the new shekels, they just call them shekels. But I can imagine a new shekel coming along very quickly because we already have high inflation here. And I wouldn't be surprised if Israel will have another hyperinflation together with the rest of the world, by the way. How stupid the government is, and no matter if it shoots itself in the foot, we need to, we need to stay the course. We need to stay confident. Right now, there's nothing official. Right now, there's nothing, formal. Right now, I'm continuing on my stacking journey. And when it becomes official, then I'll have to reconsider, my personal finances. But right now, I'm buying more silver.
Okay, great. Yeah, I would make the same move, my friend. It's interesting because they're saying that they're doing this to track illicit transactions better. They're also in the article that I was able to read in English on the Jerusalem Post. It was also just one line that mentioned gold and silver, and so it does seem kind of like you had mentioned. They're kind of testing the waters. That there might be feeling out the public reaction to this at this point. Um,
Exactly, exactly. And we see that very often that an article comes out, sometimes with outrageous propositions, to see if the public becomes, if there is public outrage. And sometimes, if there is enough outrage, then they'll, scale it down. Say they'll take it down a notch.
yeah, they'll take a step backwards. So
Exactly.
hopefully that's what happens, and hopefully if enough people talk about it and
Yes.
voice that they might be a little disgruntled, they'll just forget about this whole thing and it'll go the way of the dodo bird, so to speak.
Yes. So
Um,
yeah, I'm hoping they will back down.
out here, I believe the number is $5,000. If you go in and you deposit $5,000, um, it basically automatically triggers a check on on your account, and they consider if the funds came from a legal source. I wonder if Israel does anything like that at this point. Have you ever heard anything like that out there?
Yes. Well, there are restrictions here on cash transactions, and
Okay.
over the years they become more and more harsh, and they are considering new measures in order to track invoices to make sure that both sides are reporting the transaction. And look, there is a discussion regarding these measures, whether the Bank of Israel is considering to issue a CBDC, and whether this proposal is, as a matter of fact, a gateway to that CBDC. Because if they, because we can start banning cash with canceling the 200 shekel bill, but who says they'll stop there? Perhaps they'll cancel all the cash, and we're going to be left with the only alternative will be a CBDC. So perhaps that's a good opportunity to explain what is a CBDC, and what a CBDC may look like, how it will affect our lives. So a
Sure.
CBDC is, of course, an abbreviation of a central bank digital currency, and that's basically like crypto, like a cryptocurrency. It's gonna be on a blockchain, but it's not going to be decentralized. On the contrary, it is going to be very much centralized, because the control of it is going to be in the hands of the central bank. And also, unlike Bitcoin, its quantity is not going to be limited, but the central banks will be able to issue it at any amount that they wish. And the idea is that this CBDC will replace our national currencies. And in order to use them, every person will have like an account with the central bank directly. As a matter of fact, the commercial banks will not be needed anymore. Perhaps they're going to keep them, as an intermediary, but they don't really need them anymore, because everyone is just going to have an account at the central bank. And you won't be able to, withdraw your money from that account, because there is no physical form to the money. It just exists in that digital account.
Yeah,
And
there's no
that is,
tangible form of this.
yes, exactly. It doesn't have any tangible form. So it doesn't mean anything. You want to withdraw the money. You can't, because it has no physical form, and you can't like transfer your funds to another bank, because there is no other bank. There's just one bank, the central bank.
Oh man, what a nightmare.
Yes, and that's just the beginning, because a CBDC is potentially what we call programmable money. It means that it can be controlled from afar, controlled by the central bank, so that they put restrictions on certain people or on certain items. Just imagine, for instance, that the central bank decides that it doesn't want to allow people to buy cigarettes. It decides that cigarettes are not good for you. So you're going to come to the store, and even if they have cigarettes and they want to sell you cigarettes, you won't be able to buy them, because your CBDC won't respect the payment for cigarettes, for instance.
Total
Or it
tyranny.
could, yes, and it can be even worse. For instance, they can decide that they want to restrict the amount of fuel that you can buy, because they're concerned about global warming, for instance. Or they don't want you have enough fuel to travel to work and back, and nothing more than that,
And then
for instance.
you're in your little outdoor prison, so to speak. Yeah, and then the globalists got you at that point. You can only
Yes,
travel so far in a day, or they're
yes.
going to shut off your CBDC.
There's another thing they can do. They can make it function only in a certain geographical region. For instance, your CBDC account, it works only at your town. But if you travel to another town, then your money doesn't work there. So you can't buy food and you can't pay for a room in a hotel. So essentially, you can't travel. That restricts you to stay at your town. And that, that's of course reminds us of the idea of 15-minute cities, another idea which was floated by globalists in order to restrict, in order to fight global warming and stuff like that.
Right. I mean, it's a terrifying proposal,
Yes.
the idea of a CBDC. I mean, as of right now, any bank transfers, credit card transactions, all that kind of stuff, they can already track that stuff. And so even just getting rid of cash itself would give them a huge step up in transparency as far as invading people's privacy, seeing what they're
Yes.
spending their money on. And then, the CBDC would just be the icing on the cake. Like right now, for example, if I travel to another state and it's maybe someplace I don't go to often, I'll have situations where my credit card won't work, and then I'll have to call the bank, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we blocked that transaction because we didn't think it was you." And I'm like, "Okay, well it's me, and I need gas because I'm driving through this state right now." And then they'll, turn it back on. And so already we're seeing some beginning stages of this, almost Orwellian level of control over
Yes.
our finances.
We,
And
we've we
hopefully
also
we
saw cases in which banks refused to respect payments to bullion dealers. For instance, if someone wanted to buy gold or silver, and the bank wouldn't let them because they thought that wasn't a good use of their money.
yeah, that's outrageous. And and that's starting to get into the kind of stuff they talk about out in China where it's a social credit score system, and they might shut off their ability to buy things based on if they support the government or not, and then of
Yeah,
course out here, something that we would be highly concerned about is them trying to tell us that we can't buy firearms, or they feel like we shouldn't buy that firearm.
yeah.
And gold and silver too. That's something that would be highly concerning if they did that to me. I wouldn't like that. Luckily I haven't experienced that, but I totally believe it. Gold and silver are a threat to their current system.
Yes,
Now,
there are other things that they can do, other tricks that they can do when they have a CBDC, which are impossible in the current situation. For instance, suppose that there's inflation. The central bank sees that, hey, there's inflation. So they can just restrict the amount of money that you can spend every month so that consumption falls. They restrict consumption this way and they try to control inflation this way. And even if you have like $1 million in your CBDC account, you can only use up to $1,000 a month, for instance.
oh man, that would be terrifying. I hadn't even thought about that. They could use it to
I
to affect
I'm telling
inflation.
you, they're already thinking about it. They're already discussing it because, as far as central banks are concerned, there was this appalling thing that the head of the Bank of International Settlements, I think that was him. I think he said that currency, the national currency, is an expression of central bank liability, and we want to control the expression of our liabilities. So, in other words, he was basically saying, your money is not your money, it's our money, we're just letting you use it.
Oh,
It's infuriating.
yeah, that is
But,
infuriating.
but that's the way that these people think. They think that they own you. They think
They
about you as cattle.
Yeah, and they're definitely trying to shackle you with this. That they we're already on the farm, so to speak, and now they're trying to corral us into a smaller area where it's easier to
Yes.
track us.
And milk all the cows and shear all the sheep.
Right, absolutely. Well, I do
Yes.
hope this doesn't go anywhere. I did come across a Substack article um on the in-game investor with Rafi Farber, and it sounds like the bank out there is pushing back against it. It sounds like they're not going to play ball, and so hopefully it stays that way, and this doesn't go anywhere for you guys because this is pretty scary stuff.
Okay, so that's interesting because, here, what we call the deep state kind of opposes the Netanyahu government, the Netanyahu coalition, the
Interesting.
current coalition. And the deep state here in Israel is doing all that it can to oust Netanyahu because he is considered kind of a populist. And I don't think so. I think he's just a nationalist. But certainly people who are identified with the deep state is not popular there. They would like someone else, someone from the left to take over. So the opposition that we've seen from the central bank to this program, they could be just, this automatic response that they have, this opposition that they have to almost everything that Netanyahu tries to push. Um, I don't know. I'm not sure. It's kind of strange. You would expect that on this topic, especially because the Bank of Israel has already admitted that it is researching CBDCs, that it is considering launching a CBDC. I would expect it to support any measure which promotes the launching of a CBDC. But as you see, there's sometimes conflicting voices, even within the deep state.
That's interesting. Well, maybe that'll be kind of a saving grace for you guys for a while Netanyahu is in. If they kind of have this instinctive knee-jerk reaction to resist whatever he's doing, maybe that'll kind of keep you guys, on a level playing field, so to speak, until he's gone. But who knows once he's gone, if they might decide to move something like this forward. But at least
If
you
you
guys have
if you
that going
ask
on right now.
me, if you ask me, a prime minister from the left is more likely to push such a thing as a CBDC than a prime minister from the right, at least here in Israel.
I would say that would be the same here in the States. It would be someone from the left who would push something like this, something that was really totalitarian. Well,
Yes,
that's
and that's why you have to be very concerned from a Kamala presidency.
yeah, I'm definitely not a fan of Kamala, and hopefully we keep her out of there. I don't know if we'll make it through another 4 years of the current policies continuing on.
I'm going to tell you something which may sound outrageous, but I'm kind of hoping for a currency collapse, which is the worst thing you can ask for, because there's a lot of suffering which is sure to come with a currency collapse. But a reset, the kind of reset that we want to see, a kind of reset in which gold and silver are remonetized, become money again. It's probably our last hope to stop this madness.
Man, if we could get a bimetallic standard going again in the US, I mean, it would really save us. And then out here, we're constantly chasing our tails, trying to figure out where to put our money so it doesn't lose its purchasing power, and then people make mistakes, they invest in the wrong things, and it just makes the situation worse. If they were just losing whatever it is, 3%, 5% a year, it would have been better off than, losing half of what they put into Bitcoin or something like that. Man, it would be a blessing if we could go back to something like that.
Now, just think about it. How come things are so crazy nowadays? My theory says that everything is linked to fiat currency and the ability of central banks to issue it at any amount and the ability of governments to deficit spend at any amount. And a currency collapse will be extremely painful to the population. I'm not kidding myself. But at least it will take the power to generate inflation from the hands of the central banks and the governments, and it will stop the process. And if we manage to go back to sound money, then I think many things, many destructive processes that we're seeing nowadays will stop, because there's simply not going to be the funds to, there's not going to be money to fund them. And
Right. And
I think,
this out of control, unchecked spending,
yes,
if that money disappeared, I mean, it would fix a lot. We wouldn't have as much money to instigate wars internationally, to
yes,
perpetuate these big conflicts. Um,
yes.
it,
How about importing all those illegal, undocumented immigrants and paying them, giving them housing, free healthcare, free education, free everything? If the
yeah,
government needs to, under a sound money system, there's no funding for that. So the government can't do that.
absolutely. That's another thing that would get fixed right away. And Americans are starting to get frustrated. I had a coworker talking to me about that he had seen an article, about how much they were getting for their food stamps, and so people are starting to get frustrated
Yes.
with this situation, and a lot of them are actually on the left. So who knows, man? Hopefully we we won't have to deal with Kamala being in office, and we can start to correct a lot of these things, because I think at the ground level, at the grassroots level, there will be virtually no resistance to Trump rolling back these programs and setting everything back to the way it was when he was in office.
I'm going to say something, into that, because, I have my doubts whether the United States is still a democracy or not, whether you still have honest elections, fair elections or not. And as far as I'm concerned, whether Kamala Harris will be elected or not, that's going to be the test of whether you still have elections or not. Because if she's elected, with the fact, taking into account the fact that I think she's unpopular. From what I'm seeing, she comes across as phony, as fake. And I don't think people will really vote for her, not to the extent that the polls are showing. So if she enters the White House, regardless of what people think about her, that will be the sign for me that, unfortunately, the United States is no longer a democracy. And that's a whole different can of worms.
Well, absolutely. I mean, there is a lot of evidence that there was voter fraud, pretty widespread in the last election. And so a lot of people don't feel like this administration was legitimate to begin with. And I think a lot of people really do feel the way that you do, that we're on the verge of losing the democracy over here. And when you look at the fact that Kamala had ran for president, and she was not selected. It was extremely small amount of people that were interested in voting for her, and then she just kind of got shoved down everybody's throat. They just put her in. Um, and it's interesting because the power of the mainstream media has really convinced a lot of the left that this is okay, and that they should support her regardless. Although a lot of people are starting to become very concerned. The globalists are making progress throughout a lot of the Western world, and we've also been victimized by them. But
Yes.
I really appreciate you speaking with us about what is going on in Israel. And folks, before we dive into the Fed cutting rates by 0.5%, if you could please take a moment and hit the like button and consider subscribing to the channel, I would really appreciate it. And it would help the algorithm find our live stream. The Fed recently cut rates by 50 basis points, which was higher than the 25 points most people were expecting. And after they did, gold and silver moved up Pretty violently, I'd say, but almost immediately afterwards, and then they were smacked down really hard, and we all kind of watched that go down in real time. These people who are interested in the market, it was pretty crazy. But of course, they're coming back up now. I wanted to get your take. What do you think about them cutting rates without hitting their 2% inflation target? Um, I think they're saying that it's like 3%, but if people are concerned it's more like 8%. I mean, it doesn't seem to me like they had effectively kept inflation under control at this point. I mean, some folks are saying they should have kept raising rates if they were going to get it under control. Would you say that they should have kept raising rates in order to hit their 2% target, or
Yeah.
was lowering them now the best option considering where we are at today?
Okay, so my take on this subject is that the Federal Reserve doesn't have control over inflation in the United States right now. Why do I say that? Because when the Federal Reserve sets interest rates, it affects bank lending. First and foremost, it affects bank lending. The amount of new money which is created when people like you and me or corporations take out loans from the banks and use it, to buy goods and services, etc. But currently, I think the main driver for inflation in the United States is not bank lending. I think it's government spending. I think government spending in the US has gone, out of control. And the thing about government spending, about the federal government, it doesn't really care about the cost of borrowing. It doesn't really care whether how much they spend on interest payments. And you can see, even though that interest rates have gone up tremendously, the federal government hasn't cut back its spending. On the contrary, the Biden administration, they spent like drunken sailors. They continue to do that all the time. We even had this expression, fiscal dominance, which is a terrible expression in my view. It's just another way of saying that we, the central bank, cannot stimulate right now because we're supposedly fighting inflation. So you, the federal government, you go ahead and spend and create that stimulus that we can't create. They're admitting that the economy can't stand on its own feet without constant stimulus. They're admitting that this stimulus needs to constantly grow and grow and grow, because if they cut it back just a little bit, the entire economy will collapse, experience some sort of a deflationary collapse. And also, they're rendering the Fed powerless to fight inflation, because while the Fed is trying to, it raises rates and it does QT, it tries to reduce the money supply, but all the while the government keeps on spending. Now, it's very important to explain. Although government spending in itself, it doesn't make the currency supply grow. It doesn't make the money supply grow, but it increases the velocity of that money, right? Because once the government spends, it immediately spends that money. Once the government borrows, it immediately spends that money on goods and services. It doesn't save it. So, um, or it hands out money to the citizens, so they go out and use it on spend it on goods and services. In order to really fight inflation, you would need the central bank tightening and the federal government cutting its spending at the same time, and we haven't seen that. So this rate cut, I think it's going to be well, of course it's inflationary, but it won't mean much in the grand scheme of things. I think it's more of a political move. I think it's meant to boost the markets, the stock market, and to give people a good feeling ahead of the elections so that Kamala Harris will have better chances of getting elected, and that's it. Now, at the same time, we're seeing China easing as well. That's something new. We're seeing China stimulating its own economy, which kind of hints, which kind of tells you that the Chinese economy is not doing well, and everything, but everything that we've discussed is just fuel on the fire of gold and silver. The price of gold and silver, we've seen it rocketing higher in the past few days. We've seen gold reach over $2,600 an ounce, and silver has finally broken out of its current consolidation. Last time I checked, it was at $32 an ounce, and I think they have potential to go on further and rise much further than that. Now, the only caveat is that right now, technically speaking, at around $2,700, gold is supposed to have a bit of a resistance. Are you with me, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely. And what you were saying about the out of control spending, the national debt just went over 35 trillion, 400 billion. So it's totally out of control. Kamala's proposed budget, of course, is going to be adding to the deficit. It's completely irresponsible, and it almost seems like there's no way out at this point if we don't get someone in there that's going to be fiscally responsible.
Yeah. And,
Um,
and and by the way, that's a problem in itself, because I'm afraid, as much as I sympathize with Donald Trump, I'm afraid that he's no fiscal conservative himself. He himself, he doesn't believe in cutting the budget. He thinks that he can just grow the pie and this way, save, fix the debt by growing the pie. I don't think that's going to work. It certainly didn't work during his first term in the White House. The national debt kept on growing. Um,
Yeah, that's
but
true. And it is concerning that he's talking about doing 100% tariffs, like we had discussed before.
yes,
That's just going to, cause higher consumer prices here in the US for products and services coming from overseas. And so much of our economy is based on consumer spending now.
yes,
I don't see it working out very well. And I don't feel like he's going to be able to bully all these other countries like, we used to be able to when we were um, the petrodollar when everyone was required to hold US dollars to buy oil from Saudi Arabia.
yeah. So everything is telling me that we are due to see higher inflation in the coming years. Now, the only caveat, as I was starting to say, there is a certain technical resistance. It's the line which connects the 1980 top with the 2011 top on a log scale chart of gold. I know it sounds kind of complicated, but it's probably the last technical boundary where gold can, get stuck. That's the last hurdle that I see. And we are about to hit that line at around $2,700 an ounce for gold. And I see the possibility of a pullback here. I see the possibility of some sort of retracement, consolidation. I don't know how long it will take, perhaps a few weeks, perhaps a few months. Perhaps it won't happen at all. Perhaps the inflationary pressures are such that we're just going to punch through that line and just fly to the stratosphere. Like I don't know. I don't know. At this point, there's too much uncertainty.
So
But
you're putting that line, and you guys, I'm going to leave a link to his X feed He has a chart in here that's showing this, what he's talking about right now. You're putting that line right about 2,664. So you're thinking we might bounce off that, but if we go past it, we could be looking at some pretty big price increases, like maybe perhaps before the end of the year, or
It's not exactly clear where the line goes through because you can plot it in perhaps tiny different ways, but we're talking about the region between 2660 and 2700 dollars per ounce of gold. So we're about at that region where we could encounter some resistance. And my thinking is that if I were a banker, or should I say bankster, and I was looking I was looking to tamp down the price of gold, as they say, then I'd pick this exact spot to do that because we know for sure that all the banks that have huge short positions, they're underwater where it comes to their gold short positions, for sure.
right?
So if they're looking to, get rid of those short positions, this is about where I would expect them to act and try to knock it down. I don't know how successful they will be. Perhaps they're going to give it all they have, and perhaps the market is just going to swallow whatever they throw at it.
That's interesting. When that makes sense that they would try and like right at that resistance level, like knock it down a lot.
Yes, because they look at the same technical analysis as I do. They see the same line as I do. They see that they have this opportunity to justify this drop. If we're going to see a sudden drop, it's going to have at least the technical justification for it. So it's just a good opportunity for them to do that because if we go through this line, then I really don't see much resistance for gold to rise to let's say $3,000 by the end of the year. It's completely plausible in my view.
Interesting. Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts on gold. And it looks like silver might have punched through resistance level just over $32. What are your
Yes.
thoughts on silver moving forward?
Okay, silver, we've seen silver act as follows. Whenever gold is rising, there's pressure on silver to rise as well. And whenever gold is dropping, then, or even moving sideways, then you could see silver retreating. So still, we're still seeing silver struggling to set new all-time highs and fulfill its full potential. But there's gonna come a point that just we know that almost for sure. There's gonna come a point that if gold is strong enough, then silver is going to catch fire and start rising, and because it hasn't even set a new all-time high, right? So
Right. It's behind right now, and it does seem inevitable that it's going to come,
it
especially with
seems like if we just manage to surge higher than the distance between 30 something and 50, it could you know it could do
it could come
it
quick, huh?
could rise like in an instant almost.
Right. Yeah, like it could be a few weeks, maybe even.
I don't know, a few days, a few weeks. We don't know. There's too much things that we don't know about it. Of course, we need to ask ourselves if that will be associated with a new silver squeeze.
Right. Well, with the additional rate cuts that they're talking about moving forward, because they're talking about and anywhere from 50 to another 100, maybe more basis points next year. Do you think that we're going to keep seeing big increases in commodity prices potentially next year as well if they keep cutting rates aggressively like this?
Okay, that depends on whether we're going to get a recession or not.
Okay.
Because I want to remind everyone, we've had an inverted yield curve for so long. and now it is uninverting, which is, as many people know, a very good indication of a coming recession. And in case in case we do get a recession, I expect commodity prices to fall. Almost all commodity prices to fall. The only two commodities that may even rise during such a recession, or at least, hold their ground, are gold and silver, because they're also monetary metals. They're also money. Now, in prior recessions, we've seen if there was a collapse in the stock market, usually it dragged down gold and silver together with it. So we always have to keep in mind that during a recession, we could see a steep correction in gold and silver as well. But I've got a feeling that this time gold and silver have the potential even to, keep their ground, to keep their momentum even during a recession, because I think people are realizing that such a recession will lead inevitably to more stimulus, to more central bank easing,
Definitely.
so
Oh yeah.
to more inflation.
Yep. They're gonna have to kick that money printer on at some point. Well, I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts on that. And I mean, I think silver is very well positioned to keep moving up. The supply and demand dynamics are on silver's side. And I think it's just going to start its run here. As a lot of folks say, it follows gold. We're nowhere near all-time highs, even in nominal terms. And so I think, we're just at the very beginning of this thing. You guys, Oren has a new video out. I'm going to leave a link to it in the description. And I just want to talk to you a little bit about feedback loops. Um,
Okay. That's a new term that I'm trying to introduce to our community, because it
yes.
comes from, I have an engineering degree. I studied engineering when I was younger,
Uh-huh.
and this term, feedback loops, it comes from the world of engineering. And perhaps I should explain what it means. Well, you see, most systems which are self-regulating, they usually do that through some kind of a negative feedback loop. When we say negative, it doesn't mean that it's something bad. It just means that you subtract one value from the other. For instance, if you have a thermostat, you have like a heating system,
Yes.
and yes, it has a thermostat, and you set it to a certain temperature, and it's cold outside, so you measure the current temperature, you deduct it from the desired temperature, and because you do this subtraction, it's called a negative feedback loop. And the more distance there is between these two temperatures, the more the heater needs to work. But of course, as the temperature rises, the two become close together until they become, the same.
Hmm.
And then when you subtract one from the other, you get zero. And then your system stops working. So it's self-regulating. It turns itself off once the temperature of the heater reaches your desired temperature. Okay? But
Yes.
now let us consider the other situation. What would happen if we weren't subtracting these two values? What if we were adding the two? Well, that means
Yes.
the more the boiler works, the more it needs to work. Because, right? Because we're getting,
Yes.
we have an addition of two values instead of subtraction. So what we call positive feedback loops, these are systems which are unstable, inherently unstable. They they have a tendency to, just they create runaway effects. They get out of whack.
Right. Yeah, because it's just kind of getting out of control. And it's so if the price was to rise, let's say, quickly, and it got the public's attention. Um, and then everybody started piling in because of how long it takes for like new mines to get up and going, to increase the silver supply, which is relatively inelastic right now, maybe through increasing refining of recyclables like old silverware or something like that. This is something that could really take a little while, and might not work quite as smoothly as the heater, so to speak. Am I kind of getting that right?
Yes, I want to point out now, this idea of feedback loops, it exists also in economics. And the classic example, for instance, is like, take for instance any commodity such as wheat. If the price for any reason, let's say there's a drought and the price of wheat goes up.
Okay.
So next year, because the price has gone up, so you have farmers saying, "Oh, wheat is so expensive right now, so let's plant more wheat because we want to make more money." So the supply of wheat, as a result, it grows, and then it tends the price tends to fall back down. So it's a self-regulating system. This
Since
is
there's more abundance of wheat.
Yes, this is an example of a self-regulating system which works. This is a negative feedback loop again. But positive feedback loops are very rare. They usually don't exist because systems which have them tend to collapse. I argue that the silver market contains such positive feedback loops. And where can you see them? For instance, when you have some sort of a speculative asset, um, such as Bitcoin, but it's also true in respect to gold and silver. Because if the price rises and the public notices that the price is rising, then there's more interest generated in this asset, and people start piling into that asset, which makes the price rise even more, which generates more inflation. So it's feeding upon itself. And that is something that we can see sometimes happening in capital markets.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, I would say we've seen that happen with Bitcoin multiple times, as an
yes,
example.
yes. And why was it sustainable? Because the availability of Bitcoin, the supply of Bitcoin was limited. So unlike wheat, you can't plant, you
More
know,
Bitcoins.
more Bitcoin and produce more Bitcoin to satisfy the demand. But the same thing goes for silver. You can't produce more silver. And as a matter of fact, mine supply nowadays is pretty much insensitive to the price of silver because most silver, as we know, is produced as a byproduct of other metals. And the cost and the value, the price of silver is just a tiny component in the in the cost analysis of these mines. They they are mainly focused on their primary metal, and silver for them is just an added bonus.
Yeah, just a little
So
something extra. And yeah, 70% of it they say is coming out of mines where silver is not the primary metal that they're mining. It's copper or it's something else.
yes, copper, lead, zinc, and gold. And we don't expect, even if the price of silver rises considerably, we don't expect mine supply to increase proportionally. Perhaps there's going to be some increase specifically from primary silver mines, but there are very few of them. And as we all know, there hasn't been much investment in mines, and it takes a very long time for new mines to come online, and it takes a very long time for them to increase their production. So even if the price rises, I don't expect supply to grow substantially. Now, mainstream analysts, they would argue, hey, if the price rises, we're going to have more supply coming from recycling, which is another factor we should
Yeah,
consider.
that gets brought up a lot. And then I one thing that I heard that was kind of in my opinion a bit silly was, oh, they'll start going through all the old tailings of all the old mines and there's going to be this huge abundance of silver and none of this is going to happen quickly. I mean,
Yeah.
in my opinion. And I don't see people digging through and getting all their old silverware and going and selling it. Not anytime soon. I mean, the price would have to be significantly different. I mean, I'm talking way up in the triple digits, and not to say some people won't. As we head into an economic downturn, people will get desperate. A lot of folks do use their stacks as kind of an emergency savings account, and I love them for doing that, and I'm glad that they have that there in case they need to. But most of the people are going to sit on this for quite a while, in my opinion. And silverware, jewelry. eh, The thing is with jewelry and a lot of people that wear jewelry, they want to look wealthy. They want to look flashy. And if they know that their silver ring just quadrupled in value, but they're going to want to go around town and let people see they got this silver ring. They might have got it for 25% of the price that you would today, but they do have it now, and other people might be jealous of that. So they're not going to be too excited about just going and turning that thing in, right away. They're going to try and hold on to that jewelry, in my opinion.
Yes, I agree. But there is another thing. I believe that there will be certain people who will sell their silver if the price rises enough, and they will start going through, the attic looking for old silverware that possibly belonged to their grandmother, etc. And there's going to be some recycling, but the thing is that there is a bottleneck in this market, which is the refineries, because the refineries nowadays they can only process so much silver per year. So if there's a huge surge in investment demand for silver, and even if you have all those old jewelry and forks and spoons, you still need to recycle them in order to receive investment grade silver,
Right.
and that won't be available for a while. It's going to take them a while to recycle that silver. So I see a bottleneck there. I don't expect the supply to rise as much as some analysts believe that it would. I expect the supply to be more or less constant, and I expect that it will take many years for supply to grow and try to catch up with increased investment demand. And in the meanwhile, you're going to have lots of demand, constant supply, and the only way for the market to clear will be a higher price, an ever increasing price. And I think it's going to be sustained for a few years. That's my personal speculation.
I think you're
So,
totally correct. And that is important for people to consider what you brought up about the bottleneck at the refiners. They can only melt down so much of this and turn it into investment grade silver. And based on some numbers that I had looked up a few months ago, what's available right now, it's only about one half dollar, 0.37 ounces per person on the planet. So that there's not a huge amount of investment grade silver out there for people to get their hands on at this point.
and the last example that I give of a possible positive feedback loop. Again, positive feedback loops are the kind that make the market explode. Um, is the possibility that tech companies are going to freak out, are going to panic, and start hoarding silver, because everybody assumes that just like any other commodity, if the price rises too much, then industrial demand is going to fall because people can't afford to buy that product. But as it turns out, when it comes to consumer electronics, every appliance, every product that we have, for instance, smartphones, they contain very small amounts of silver. Those amounts are crucial for so that the appliance works. You need
Correctly.
that silver. Yes, you need
Absolutely.
that
They need it.
silver. Yes, it's needed for the smartphone to function properly, but it's just a tiny amount. So if the price rises, I don't think it's going to affect the demand for smartphones or flat screen TVs. But what I do think will happen, I do think that at a certain point, those tech companies, the companies that produce these products, they're going to panic and they're going to start hoarding silver out of fear that there's going to be a shortage and they're not going to be able to crank out those smartphones. And that's going to be a huge hit for them. If because due to such a small component in their view, they're going to lose, the entire value of the device.
Right. And I've heard people I think your conclusion's totally correct. I've heard people say, "Oh, well, they'll just replace it." Well, basically any piece of modern electronics that has an on and off switch, the contacts are going to be silver. Now, they can replace it with gold. Gold is a good um alternative for that function, although gold's $2,600 an ounce. So they're not going to switch it to gold because it's too much. They're going to keep going with silver, and it wouldn't surprise me if they do decide to start stockpiling it if they foresee silver going up in price a lot. That makes a lot of sense.
Yes, I agree completely. Now, we have to understand that um, switching from silver to copper to the extent that it's possible, silver has certain properties that copper doesn't. Copper comes, it's kind of close. It has very good conductivity. And the problem with copper is that it tends to, corrode.
And it
So,
migrates. The electricity flowing through it
yes.
is way more likely to migrate.
Yes, but to the extent that it is possible to switch from silver to copper, it still takes a long time to redesign your product.
Good point.
You have to change the specifications completely. You need to check to see if there's not, those devices are so complex that you really need to redesign them if you're switching from silver to copper. And also there are, it affects your assembly line sometimes.
The whole production process, yeah, would have to get
Yes,
revamped.
sometimes it costs you more to switch from silver to copper than you can possibly save on the cost of that silver. And it takes time. So I'm kind of guessing that companies, at least for the short term, they're going to hoard silver. Now, when it comes to long term, perhaps they're going to try to switch to copper, but it takes time and it takes money to do that. So, short term, I see the possibility of tech companies starting to stack silver just as we're doing today.
That's interesting. Hey, thanks a lot for sharing your thoughts on that. And that's pretty powerful. They would have to redesign all these products. So that's something people need to keep in mind. They're not just going to be able to switch it out. In most
And that's,
cases,
if I may say, so
you bet.
yeah, most economists are simply not aware of that because they've never dealt with electronics in their lives. They are familiar with commodities, traditional commodities, and they're thinking, oh, price rises, demand falls. Okay, they're not thinking any further than that. They're not imagining other scenarios. And I think that specifically in the case of silver, silver is a completely different beast. It's probably the single commodity that has these properties, this very special, unique market structure that gives it the potential to explode in price.
Absolutely. I mean, that's very insightful. Well, I really appreciate you coming on today and sharing your thoughts on that. And I think you're right. The economists are not considering that. When they're looking at these products, there would be a lot going on in the background if they were going to revamp these products. Uh, Folks, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. Please hit the like button, consider subscribing to the channel. Please consider subscribing to Orange channel. He is the Silver Hermit. You'll be able to find the links in the description. I'm going to throw them in there right now. Um,
I just want to mention, we need to say that nothing of what we say is investment advice. We're not, professional investment advisors. So everyone needs to do their own research and, invest and stack responsibly. Yes, I am very bullish on silver and gold as well, but you still need to do your own research and stack responsibly.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is not financial advice. Do your own due diligence. Um, well, you guys, thank you so much. I hope you guys enjoyed the live stream and I hope you have a great day out there and we will see you in the next video.
So thank you, Brian, for having me for another discussion. I always enjoy our talks, and we'll be seeing each other in a couple of weeks.
Yes, I'll see you at the